Vasher, Zahel and Kalad. Just a few of the many names of the man who started and ended the many war. Vasher assisted in creating what many consider the most dangerous object in the Cosmere, and spent the rest of his life quietly trying to disappear from the responsibility of having made it. Let's take a look at Vasher, who he was, who he is, and what lies in store for him in the future. Welcome to Second Breakfast. My name's Lee. Join me to explore the lore, theories, and biggest questions of the Cosmere, because if I have the questions, maybe you do too. If that sounds like your cup of tea, consider subscribing and joining us in future journeys into the Cosmere. If, like me, you were initially confused by the historical backdrop of Warbreaker, the connections between the characters, and the implications therein, pay attention. This is for you. Let's start with the 5 scholars. 5 people who collectively pushed the art of awakening further than anyone has before or since. Vasher, Shashara, Denth, Yestiel, and Darstiel. 5 individuals on Nalthis who made breakthroughs in BioChromatic Awakening that changed their world irreversibly. Vasher is a returned, and a returned is an individual who died and came back with a divine breath. Individuals chosen by the planet's shard, Endowment, to return to their bodies having peered into the future via the spiritual realm. These returned are granted the opportunity to change the events of these visions, a grand purpose to their new existence. Endowment took their memories, and so after returning they retain no memory of their former life, other than some general knowledge and some of their former skills. And the returned are cognitive shadows, and as explored in my previous videos, cognitive shadows are the lingering imprint of people who have died but remain in existence because Investiture preserve their mind and identities. Returned, Fused, Thydekar, and the Heralds are all types of cognitive shadows. Beings that have lived, died, and had their cognitive self re-imprinted back onto their bodies through investiture. Each of the 5 scholars were returned. As just mentioned, every returned comes back with a purpose, something they were sent back to accomplish. They do not necessarily know what it is, and the way they eventually fulfill this purpose is by giving away that divine breath to save someone's life. This is why Lightsong hears the ailments of the denizens of Halandren, to decide whether one of them is worthy enough of his sacrifice to cure their ailments. Because the gift of a divine breath endows miraculous healing, at the cost of the life of the donor. In Halandren, the priests assigned returned their names, identities, and titles, and mythology bestowed upon them, amidst the pure disorientation following death, an encounter from God, the future, and a resurrection. Vasher was associated in Halandren tradition with titles like Peacegiver, and later mythologized in ways that blurred his identity across multiple names. Together, the 5 scholars made discoveries that would permanently change Nalthis. Yestiel invented Ica alcohol, a substance that would contribute to a more sustainable version of the lifeless, who were a sort of undead army. Shashara is associated with breakthroughs in the extreme reductions in the breath cost for creating lifeless. And eventually, Shashara discovered the ability to awaken steel, and together with Vasher, they created something using 1,000 breaths and a single command: destroy evil. Nightblood, a black sword that talks, feeds on investiture, and later ended up destroying the vessel of Odium, what many in the community would call the most destructive object in the Cosmere, carrying a mission that it has no ability to fulfill, because Vasher believed, and still believes, that Nightblood's command was fundamentally flawed, that the sword has no framework for what evil actually is. In his estimation, what Nightblood does is consume everything. He consumes investiture, and he does it cheerfully, and he has no idea that is even a problem. But let's look at the Many War, the conflict that broke the 5 scholars apart. Vasher accepted deep responsibility for his role in how it unfolded, and how could he not? The Many War had roots that ran deeper than any one person. Tensions between kingdoms, the spread of the new lifeless techniques thanks to the 5 scholars, and competing pressures that had been building for years. And Vasher, then known as Kalad, chose to initiate a war to overthrow the Idrian royal family. But at this point they were the ruling dynasty of Hanold, the kingdom that later split into Halandren and Idris. We will just call them Idrians from here on in, as it is this royal family that later went on to found the kingdom of Idris, separating themselves from Halandren. He created Kalad's Phantoms, an army of lifeless built from awakened bones, encased in stone, and in a large-scale military action that destabilised Halandren. This enabled Vasher to drive the Idris royal family into the mountains and allowed him to seize control. He carried other names across this period: Strife Lover, Taluxin, and during this time, Vasher and Shashara fell in love and got married. But eventually, Vasher saw what he had caused. He called his lifeless back and ended the conflict himself. And then, in an act that historians would struggle to reconcile with the man they attributed the war to, he gave a store of breaths to the priests of Halandren. That became Peacegiver's treasure, passed from God King to God King. It established the new order of the kingdom after the Idrians and their royal family were forced out. It profoundly shaped Halandren's military and political structure in the generations that followed, with the God King at its centre, the Returned as his advisors, and the theology that built around the breaths and the iridescent tones. After this, Khalad was given the moniker Peacegiver, a separate legend from Khalad who struck first, because for a long time they assumed that these were two different men, but of course they weren't. And then, near the end of the Many-War, came the moments that defined everything that followed. At the Battle of Twilight Falls, Shashara drew Nightblood in a battle for the first and only time, and she was impressed by what it could do. She wanted to share the knowledge of awakened steel to create more, but Vasher was disgusted by what he saw, by the trail of death the sword left behind. And to prevent the secrets of the creation of awakened steel, Vasher killed Shashara, his wife and the woman he loved, the person whose discovery made the sword possible in the first place. He used the weapon they had built together against her, because he could not allow more Nightbloods to exist in the world. Denth, one of the other 5 scholars, is Shashara's brother, and when Vasher killed his sister with Nightblood, Denth naturally grew to hate Vasher. And Arstil, another of the 5 scholars, and Yestil's brother, eventually came face to face with Vasher at some point after. In an attempt to mediate the situation between his brother and Vasher, they ended up dueling, and Arstil was by far the superior swordsman. Despite Arstil limiting himself, Vasher misinterpreted the situation and eventually killed Arstil, using a trick to win the duel he couldn't have won clearly. He transferred breath mid-fight to stun Arstil and ran him through. That is who Vasher is before we met him in Warbreaker. A cognitive shadow, who accepted responsibility for the role he played in the Many-War, who lost the woman he loved to a decision that he made, and in trying to prevent further harm ended up causing even more. A man accumulating history he would spend centuries trying to make right. By the time we meet Vasher in Warbreaker, he has spent years stripping himself of most of what made him once significant. He moves through Titalia like a ghost of a legend that he once was, with Nightblood and a minimal amount of breath, with no particular goal except to keep watching the political landscape of the Halandren that he forged. The central threat is a war. Halandren, with its military strength, its God King, and its thousands of lifeless soldiers, are being manoeuvred towards conflict with Idris, the smaller, poorer, religiously conservative kingdom it now dominated following the Many-War. After the Many-War, Idris moved towards conservatism and opposed Awakening after the problems caused by the Awakeners when their throne was usurped from them. They wore modest, bleached clothes, a drastic difference to the vibrant, provocative dress of Halandren. A clear and intentional decision to separate themselves from the new order which took their kingdom. They did, however, retain their hair, named the Royal Locks. The Royal Locks changed their appearance, both length and colours, based on the person's emotional state. They can also be controlled given training and experience, as inferred by the name, linked to the previous royalty in Halandren, and a desirable trait among the ostentatious new order. But from inside the Court of Gods, the conflict between these two nations are being stoked by someone, and that someone is Denth. Denth is among the most dangerous individuals Vasher has ever encountered, and his hatred of Vasher is understandable, given that he previously watched Vasher kill his sister with the sword that they made together. Denth, like Arstil, was a superior fighter to Vasher. He has been positioning himself for decades, with Vasher as the central focus of that long-held vendetta. Into all of this comes Vivenna, Princess of Idris, the royal family previously forced out of Halandren, trained from childhood to be the political sacrifice that would prevent exactly this type of conflict. Vivenna was to be sent to marry the God King as part of a treaty arrangement. An arrangement that legitimises the Halandren kingdom and reintroduces the Royal Locks back into the Halandren royalty. From birth, Vivenna was groomed for this very role. She is educated, composed, and wholly unprepared for what she finds in Titalia, after she follows her sister Ciri, who was sent in Vivenna's place thanks to her father's attempt to keep Vivenna at home. Her path in Titalia eventually crosses with Vasher's, the very individual responsible for overthrowing the previous royal family that Vivenna belongs to. Vasher's approach to Vivenna is blunt. He opens her eyes to what Halandren really is. He teaches her in Awakening itself, a practice her kingdom opposes due to the conflict previously caused. She learns to command objects, to use her cloak as a weapon, and to operate in a city that is actively trying to swallow her. The climax of Warbreaker resolves in typical Sanderson fashion, with revelations that recontextualise everything that you have read up to that point. Denth's scheme unravels, and Vasher and Vivenna work together in an attempt to prevent the war, eventually leading Vasher to retake control of Khalad's phantoms and take out the lifeless army marching towards Idris. and Vasher killing Dent the same way that he killed Arstil, using the trick of breath transfer to stun him for long enough so that Vasher could seize the moment and kill Dent, finally confirming to Dent how he beat the superior swordsman. And so Halandrin avoids the war, and Vasher remains burdened by the consequences of his past and his role in creating Nightblood. So after the events of Warbreaker, Vasher leaves Nalthis and brings Nightblood with him to Roshar. On Roshar, Vasher is known as Zahel, and Zahel just wants to be left alone. He surfaces as a swordmaster in the Kholin war camp, a teacher, a deeply unimpressed teacher, and communicates with a novel lack of diplomacy. He trains Kaladin, and he trains Renarin, and he trained Adolin, arguably the greatest duelist of a generation. He pushes all of them towards a competence that they could not have reached without him, and he does it almost begrudgingly. The curiosity for the readers who recognise him is why Roshar? The answer sits in what we understand about how he survives. As a return, Vasher requires a divine breath to live. Without it, his body cannot sustain itself. On Nalthis, maintaining that costs, either drawing it from other people or accumulating enormous amounts of personal stores. It is not a renewable resource, but Stormlight is. Sanderson has confirmed that Vasher can sustain himself on Roshar by drawing on Stormlight rather than consuming breaths. Exactly how that works at a mechanical level hasn't been explained, but the practical results are clear. On a world where investiture cycles naturally through every high storm, Stormlight provides him with an alternative source of investiture to sustain his returned condition, reducing reliance on breaths without needing to drain others like a parasite. And there is also Vivenna. She appears in Oathbringer as Azure, carrying a blade that appears connected to the same line of awakening experimentation that eventually produced Nightblood. Brandon has confirmed the relationship without fully explaining it, and the exact mechanics remain unrevealed. If you've read Warbreaker, you likely recognise her immediately. She tells Kaladin and Adolin herself before leaving Shadesmar she came to Roshar hunting Nightblood, and the one who brought it here. Their dynamic carries the full weight of Warbreaker between them. And then there is Nightblood. Vasher and Nightblood part ways on Roshar at some point. As we discussed in the Valor and Endowment video, the chain of custody that carries the sword through to Zeth reads as anything but coincidental. His greatest mistake ends up in the hands of someone who does not fully understand what they have, in service of a cause moving towards confrontations that Nightblood is extraordinarily equipped to resolve. For years, readers wondered exactly what Vasher was doing on Roshar before the true desolation. Wind and Truth reveals that Vasher worked directly with King Gavilar Kholin years ago, teaching him the fundamental physics of investiture. In fact, as far as we know, Vasher was the first person in Cosmere history to discover and create anti-light. The entire arms race of anti-light that later defines the true desolation started because Vasher shared his scholar secrets with a power-hungry king. Because of what he knows, Vasher is being hunted down, ambushed, and captured by Axendwell, a rogue terrorist woman working with the Ghostbloods. Hardly surprising given their obsession with investiture transport. And for a chunk of that book, Vasher is subject to a brutal interrogation. To survive this, Vasher mentally prepares to use his memory manipulation, a highly advanced command we first glimpsed at the end of Warbreaker. He plans to literally excise the memories of his torture from his own mind once he escapes, choosing to delete the trauma rather than carry it. Furthermore, trapped in a room hidden from the sibling and completely cut off from Stormlight, he is forced to rely on his baseline stockpile of Nalthian breaths just to keep his body alive. And he does survive. He escapes, battered but unbroken, and his trajectory shifts towards the future. By the end of the book, he takes on Lift as his apprentice. It's a perfect pairing. Lift naturally generates lifelight from food rather than high storms, making her a walking, breathing anomaly of investiture. Exactly the kind of puzzle an ancient scholar of the Five Scholars cannot resist, and he will be uniquely motivated to unlock the secrets. If you've liked the video so far, like and subscribe for more content, so that you can be there when the next video about Marsh goes live. But anyway, let's continue. So what is next for Vasher? Sanderson has confirmed that Vasher was originally conceived as a Stormlight character. Warbreaker was written as his backstory. Sanderson felt that Vasher's story was so significant to what he planned for Stormlight Archive that he needed an entire novel to establish it. And yet, across 5 books, Vasher has been a background character, someone at the edge of the frame. Warbreaker gave us 2 things that matter enormously to the back half of Stormlight. The first is Nightblood. We have already seen that pay off. Nightblood destroying Rays was a paradigm-shifting moment in the Cosmere. Without Warbreaker, readers perhaps would not have understood the true power of Nightblood. but we have not yet had Vasher's payoff. And as we have already discussed, Vasher is a return who has done an extraordinary amount across a very long time. But he has not yet fulfilled his purpose, his long-held destiny after being returned by the Shard of Endowment. He accepted responsibility for the many more, and then he ended it. He created Nightblood. He killed his wife to prevent further catastrophe on Nalthis. He crossed the Cosmere to Roshar, and he shared the secrets of Anti-Light with the entitled King Gavilar. None of it, evidently, has been the reason he was returned to life by a god to change the future. Whatever Vasher saw when he died prior to returning, the moment Endowment showed him what he was being sent back to accomplish, it was not any of those events. So then, what did he see? The low-hanging fruit is that perhaps at some time in the back half of the Stormlight archive, one of our protagonists is going to die at the worst possible moment, on the cusp of something that matters, and Vasher will be there to give away his divine breath. A man who has spent centuries accumulating history, waiting to finally fulfill his destiny. And then there is Lift. By the end of Wind and Truth, Vasher has taken Lift on as his apprentice, which on the surface looks like the old swordmaster finding a new student. With the world transformed by the events of Arc 1, the majority of the Knights Radiant face a very different relationship with their abilities than they did before. Lift is different. Her relationship with Investiture has always been different. She generates lifelight through a mechanism that does not depend on the High Storm, which is now gone. She will have access to her abilities in the back half of the series at a time when the other Radiants will not. Additionally, she is confirmed as the main flashback character for Book 6. She is, by all available evidence, the closest thing the back half has to a primary hero. The Kaladin of the second half of the series. And she is being trained by a man who has always meant to be a Stormlight character. A man who trained the greatest duelist of a generation. And so, this apprenticeship runs in both directions. The skills she gains from him, the understanding of investiture and combat she develops under one of the greatest living awakeners in the Cosmere. This shapes what she becomes in Arc 2. And Lift, simply by existing, may represent the answer to how Vasher keeps existing in a world that has pulled the infinite source of investiture out from underneath his feet. Could Vasher, a proven scholar in investiture research, in his pursuit of solving his expiring investiture problem, inadvertently solve the investiture problem that all the Radiants are facing? Could his research effectively reawaken the Radiant powers after they are effectively forced into a slumber following the disappearance of the High Storm? Vasher could be the future for investiture on Roshar. And if the divine breath theory holds, if Vasher's purpose is to give his life for someone at the critical moment, then Lift is the most compelling candidate the series has placed right in front of us. Because what did Vasher see when he died and Endowment offered him the chance to come back? But a returned who was originally written as a Stormlight character, whose entire arc in Warbreaker exists to make a single future moment land with the weight it deserves, who has taken on the likely hero of Arc 2 as his student, who carries the purpose that centuries of consequence have not yet fulfilled. And wouldn't it be interesting to see another connection between Endowment and Cultivation, much like the video on Valor and her involvement on Roshar? Vasher has seen his destiny, and the back half of the Stormlight archive is where we will finally find out what that was. To close the video out, what makes Vasher so interesting to me is the gap between what he has been capable of and what he has chosen. One of the greatest scholars in the Cosmere, hiding on a foreign planet. A man who accepted responsibility for his failings and then spent centuries trying to disappear. Who now teaches sword forms to soldiers on a world that is not his own, because it is the only place quiet enough to almost be forgotten. But he cannot run away from his destiny, because Vasher is a return, and return come back for a reason. He saw something when he died, Endowment showed him something worth returning for, and his destiny is as yet unfulfilled. Like, subscribe and get in the comments. I want to know what you think Vasher saw. Vote on the next topic in the community post, because if I have the question, maybe you do too. I'll see you in the next one.